So, greetings, hello. It's Thomas Daffin here, greetings. Today is the 5th of April, and I'm recording my weekly talk about the affairs of the world, geopolitics, the search for peace. And my role as a philosopher and intellectual in that is to make a few critical comments each week. You know, this started as a complaint against Brexit. I was so moved by that idiocy that I started recording this each week and fasting, and I'm still doing so. But now there's so many more other problems added on. We don't just have the Brexit crisis. We now have the coronavirus crisis, which has, taken this up to a planetary level of idiocy. So I'm going to be commenting on that. And, we have global uncertainty and just, this is looking like a planetary... it's a medical problem, as I said. My job as a philosopher is to comment on the ethics and the spirituality and the metaphysics of the crisis we're in. And this is a medical problem, to put it mildly. We're all on lockdown and people are dying, in large numbers. I wrote a whole book about 9/11 because I was so moved by the tragedy of that experience. And I love New York, and I have many dear friends and dear memories of New York. And I was born just up the road in Montreal. So, I devoted 2 years of my life to researching that book in great detail. It's the only actual in-depth historical study of 9/11 as yet. It's very interesting that a new report has just come out from the University of Alaska, which documents absolutely crystal clear that Building 7, which was never mentioned in the original commission under Bush, did not collapse through fires. It was brought down by controlled demolition. Of course we know that. And as an honorary New Yorker, I'm utterly appalled that it's taken this long for any official academic body to actually, say that. We're nearly, 19 years later. So I think one of the problems I'm going to be highlighting and have been doing all along in my talks is the responsibility of academics to actually speak truth and research truth. I am interested, to see that the Institute of Technology in Wuhan, which is a university, has as its motto, seeking truth. I'll be coming back to the Wuhan Institute of Technology a bit later, but I think we should actually activate. All academic institutions should have that as their motto, searching truth. But unfortunately, we're suffering a shortage of truth on this planet. Partly the problem with academia is it's become so hyper-specialised that, experts can speak the truth in their field and do tentatively, but they'll often not venture outside. They'll say, oh, well, I can't comment on that, that's outside my... So that's one way truth has become closed down. It's become boxed into the little areas that academics research. Now, I'm a generalist. As a philosopher, I believe our duty, and this is why I got into philosophy when I first got into academia and so on. But I didn't get into philosophy through academia. I got into philosophy as a life mission, because here's the subject that joins up all the boxes, that joins up all the subjects. You're taught in school these separate things, art, music, history, languages, mathematics, biology, chemistry, and you go from lesson to lesson. But nobody ever talks about, well, what do they all mean? What's the point of all this? What's the meaning of all this? What is life? You will never get that type of question except in a philosophy class, which good schools have. I've taught head of philosophy as head of philosophy in several really good schools in Britain where they have it on the agenda. And that's why I taught there. But normal schools, sadly, don't even have it on the agenda. They have something called religious studies, RE, in the UK at least, which is something, and most good RE teachers will bring in philosophy and ethics, and the exam syllabuses for GCSE are slanted to that. And you can do a great deal within that. Although the problem is the time constraints. You only have one lesson a week, 1 hour a week. And the kids really don't, take it seriously, and they think maths is a far more important subject, or electronics or something, because it seems to offer better, pay progression in the career schedule they're already planning. So this is unfortunate. It's a side effect of capitalism, if you want, and the pressures of commercialism in education. We're neglecting ethics and we're neglecting philosophy, and that's going to be, sadly, part of my theme today. So I'm welcome anyway. I'm a philosopher, as you gather, and a historian of ideas. I think that what I have to say is very relevant to the crisis the world's facing. As I say, because I've made it my job since many years to be interested in the bigger picture, the wider perspective. That's what interested me in philosophy. That's why I studied history of ideas. When I did my history degree at the University of London, I wanted to study the history of everything. So I did world history. I studied the history of China, Russia, the Balkans, America, Britain, you name it, I studied the history of it, and in depth, not just like a little bit. I got all the historical encyclopedias I could, some of them are here behind me still, and I wanted to know what is, the history of everything, so I could diagnose the cause of the potential of nuclear omnicide, which we are still facing. That's another problem I'm addressing in these talks. If the coronavirus doesn't get us, the accidental nuclear war might, and there are still brave souls protesting outside, the Helensburgh docks there at Faslane, in the peace camp at Faslane. So greetings to my friends there, and to other peace activists around the world who are still, protesting nuclear weapons. Yeah, absolutely, we have to. And it's not just nuclear now, it's biological weapons, because there is a sneaky feeling that perhaps the coronavirus has been tinkered with, and there are people, intellectuals, saying that, scientists. I will be addressing that point. And chemical weapons, of course, have been used in my lifetime. Potentially they still could be. So, yes, so that's what interested me, and that's why I gravitated from philosophy, in pure philosophy. I could be just an academic studying Aristotle's 10 categories ad nauseam and translating them into Arabic and stuff, which some people do, and like Professor Sarabji of King's College, my dear colleague. I'd love to be doing Aristotelian philosophy in the Arab world, like my friend Professor Sari Nusaybeh, whose rector was, serving as rector of the University of East Jerusalem. He's written a book about Aristotelian thought in the Islamic and Arab world. He's a great intellectual. He's on our board of the World Intellectual Forum. And so, yes, I'd love to be doing that kind of work. But unfortunately, destiny dragged me, kicking and screaming, into peace studies, because I felt that one shouldn't just sit on one's, comfort zone and study how many angels can sit on a pin, as my mother used to grumble at Thomas Aquinas's concerns. But actually, how can the knowledge I've acquired in history and philosophy and so on help advance global peace and understanding between nations and peoples and religions and cultures, right from the macro level up to Islam versus Christianity versus Judaism type struggles, or Soviet bloc versus capitalist bloc of the Cold War era, or down to the level of the domestic dispute, which I trained as a mediator to solve neighbourhood disputes and things. So that took me into peace studies, and then I worked at the University of London in that research. I did, meet most of the intellectual experts in the field of peace studies around the world. I'm still in touch with many of them. Sadly, some of the founders of the discipline have died, but there are still some left. And so they're very much, I think I will be addressing this problem of coronavirus and related matters from a philosophical, historical perspective, and also a peace studies perspective. Okay, so one of the things I'm very interested in is science policy. One of the fields of academia that I've looked at, which relates to peace studies, because our critique of military investment in military research, which is in billions every year around the world, particularly in America and American-funded research is developing new weapons. My ex-friend, who's dead now, Dr. Steve Wright, was keeping tabs on who's funding what new weapons around the world. There are people, as I'm talking, sitting in labs with vast salaries, inventing new ways of zapping you. Not just coronavirus type things, although there are people inventing those. There are people inventing all kinds of new death ray type things, which Steve Wright lectured about. I heard him lecture several times about this. I mean, it's scary what they're inventing, actually, and I think it's totally wrong. I don't think they should be. I think we should, be doing peace research, how we can live together as one humanity, how we can organise some kind of global governance system whereby everybody is living not in fear of, nuclear war and biological warfare attacks and all the rest of it, and poverty and unemployment and all the crises that the planet is facing. My other colleagues on the World Intellectual Forum, some of them specialise in that kind of thinking. Professor Glenn T. Martin is an expert who's involved with an organisation that's trying to create a world democratic forum, parliamentary forum, so people vote who would be representing them, a kind of global parliament, and there are other colleagues working with that. I support that general direction of travel, and Dr. Swaminathan, another Indian academic on the board, the chairman of the World Intellectual Forum, has also written about this, the need for a democratic global governance system. So we could hold these national politicians to account, but then there follows the question of, well, how do we hold the scientists to account? Because knowledge is power, and so when Boris Johnson is just a fig leaf. He's a spokesman for cutthroat capitalism without a conscience, and because some huge banking interests and insurance interests and God knows what offshore interests decided Brexit was a good idea, they stuck him in charge of the Tory party through unbelievable machinations and manipulations of the media and the BBC, and the corporate takeover of British intellectual life is pretty well advanced. Brexit is their strategy from beginning to end, and so Boris Johnson is just a fig leaf. So when he trots out anything to do with science policy, he's getting his advice from scientists. We have this system in the UK of the chief scientist, right? But unfortunately, if you look at them, they're in the pay of, they come from the official boards run by the corporate world, the Wellcome Institute, Glaxo, the pharmaceutical world, and ultimately the military-industrial complex, which has the money in science and funds most of this research. So I have questions to ask about the ethics of science policy, and that is a huge area because, so I'm not alone. There are, I'm just, a swimmer in the fields of the seas of knowledge here, dropping a few stones in, as Newton would say. But fortunately, there is at the University of Sussex a very interesting body called the Science Policy Research Unit, SPRU, whose founder was a friend of my mother's because she taught at the University of Sussex, and as a boy I used to go up to the campus and wander about. I knew the son of the founder of SPRU, which is still going. It's the most important such research institute in the UK and one of the most important in the world. And they're obviously interested in all aspects of science policy. Who thinks it's a good idea to fund X millions of pounds of research into biological warfare research or nuclear weapons or whatever, guidance system for nuclear missiles, versus social science research into solving unemployment around the world, or economic science research into what kind of citizens' income system might be actually viable for the planet, or research into domestic behaviour under lockdown and why people are getting into domestic disputes and killing each other, and there are murders happening because people are all locked in. So or general peace research. So SPRU is very good at that. Another centre that does this is at Harvard, there's another Science Policy Research Institute at Harvard, which looks also at medical research. And there's one also at MIT, a program in science, technology and society. So there are think tanks, there are academic niches where these questions can be raised. It was for this reason I created, in the late 90s, year 2000, the Global Green University as a sort of autonomous academic space for thinking, joined up thinking about ethical, scientific, spiritual and philosophical approaches to planetary transformation and peace creation. You know, I'm an activist as well as an intellectual researching peace. I think we also ought to create it. We're co-creators of reality. And we now know from quantum physics that, you know, in the sense the scientist is part of the experiment. How we think, how we frame the experiment in some way shapes the results we get. So if we want to research peace, we have to create it, co-create it together. And that's the purpose of my talks, that's the purpose of my teaching. So that's the purpose of the Global Green University, and I'm working with various students, and people are welcome to get involved. There's a website, and there's, you know, a lot of work to be done, because I think academia took a wrong turn some time ago when it divorced science from ethics, when it divorced medicine off again in a separate direction, and it divorced philosophy from these subjects, and it created this illusion that knowledge is value-free. Most academics, most scientists, so-called, around the place will say their subject has nothing to do with ethics. It's simply knowledge, right? Well, I don't, you know, I fundamentally disagree, and that's the point of the Green University, is to say, no, hang on, knowledge is incredibly connected to virtues and values. That was the point Socrates made, who's our line manager in the academic tradition. Socrates went around Athens saying, look guys, you're all very clever, you Athenians, but let's talk about justice. Let's talk about goodness. And some of them thought he was mad, and some of them became his friends and followers. And he was such a threat to the Athenian state that they killed him. Because to actually ask questions about justice and truth and love, as he did in the symposium, and righteousness, to use the biblical term, can cause trouble to political leaders, and it still does. But that's why we have to keep asking these questions. And really, it's the self-serving interests of the political, military, industrial machine that wants to keep value questions and discourse out of academia. And that's part of the problem of where we've got to here. This is a great chance, this planetary lockdown, to go back to basics, to reread, some of Socrates' thoughts. When I was in Athens for the World Congress of Philosophy, I went to a one-man show up on the Areopagite of a man actor, very famous actor, Greek, playing Socrates. At the trial, when he defended himself, he said, all I've been trying to do is get some fundamental questions asked here in Athens. And instead of executing me, you ought to give me a pension. I'm an asset to your state. Of course, it's true. He's probably one of the most famous Athenian citizens have ever lived. But no, they killed him. Yeah, okay, so that's what we're up against, guys. And that's the institutionalized bureaucracy of ignorance that governs societies. That's what's unfortunately behind Kushner and Trump and their response to coronavirus. That's the kind of Athenian, Areopagite, let's just muddle on and be bureaucrats approach. And it's the same with the civil servants around, any that live and survived around the Cummings culling. I mean, Cummings is the most unbelievable excuse for an intellectual that I've ever met. Not that I've met him, but the way he's taken over the British, control levers is I think, shows this abject failure of our culture to do the joined-up thinking necessary to connect policy, ethics, values, and peace. I do celebrate the fact that we've got Sir Keir Starmer now as leader of the Labour Party. That's an event that happened yesterday, Saturday the 4th of April. I know people that voted for him, and my family, we were always Labour supporters back in Kemp Town when I was growing up, and I think most moderate, sensible Fabian socialists around Britain, you know, Fabian Society is something I used to belong to when it seemed relevant, and it set up the LSE where I studied part of my degree. Yeah, I think a lot of people will be sighing, you know, breath of fresh air that Mr. Starmer is now in charge of the Labour Party, and I think he will become the next Prime Minister of Britain, unless the coronavirus gets him or someone assassinates him. You know, gosh, God forbid. So, yeah, science policy is very important, and it was the Labour Party that set up the University of Sussex, where Sprue is based. I've always argued there should be a chair of peace studies at Sussex. Do give me a ring, folks. Okay. Let me address the problem of coronavirus briefly, because one thing that's very interesting is there's a very important website which lists all the research going on around the world into coronavirus issues, and it's online. You can access this, and I'm just going to read a few things out. This is you know, a website that lists ongoing research and issues to do with that. Billions in regional funds can be moved from research and development to COVID-19. That's a headline. I'm just giving you the headlines. Clinical academics redeployed to the NHS to battle COVID-19. Lack of COVID-19 coordination worrying, former ERC chief. This is 3rd of April. These are headlines. Each of them is an article explaining how research in academia, science and medicine is struggling to try and cope with the COVID-19 outbreak and around the world. Crick and Cambridge help NHS to ramp up COVID-19 testing. Space-based ideas for tackling COVID-19 from Luxembourg. Particle physics strategy postponed due to COVID-19. COVID-19 funding updates, European research agencies. African heads of state create COVID-19 fund. South Africa sets up COVID-19 data hub. Universities fear long-term damage as impact of COVID-19 becomes clear across Europe. Etc., etc. European Commission joins calls to open COVID-19 research. University of Oxford wins grant for drug trial to prevent COVID-19, etc., etc. And it's, you know, I'm pleased to see this, but my grief is that it's so late in the day. You see, I'm a great believer in preventative medicine, health creation, rather than, you know, post illness intervention, and that's why I supported Sarah Wollaston, who was the MP for Totnes and who I greatly admire. She's now unfortunately no longer in Parliament. I hope she comes back. Who started out her career as a Conservative, but a soft Conservative with a heart, and she then eventually joined the Lib Dems, and she's a very good woman, and she was active in the idea to have therapeutic gardens attached to every hospital in the UK, which I think is absolutely essential for creating health, and in communities as well. People that, you know, don't have access to gardens and etc. Therapeutic gardening is a really great thing. I have a dear friend in Glasgow who's running several schemes like that. So, but we're not doing preventative medical work. Obviously, healthier immune systems can fight this disease. So we should be investing in health creation for the community, which was the point of the Peckham experiment. When I lived in Peckham and was running my institute from that part of southeast London, I was running meetings in the House of Lords, and I discovered this thing called the Peckham experiment, which was active in the 1930s. And that was a model for when the NHS was created. A lot of people are quite rightly celebrating the NHS, clapping the nurses and doctors. Well, you need to know where the NHS came from. It came from this Peckham experiment because a number of socialist Fabian thinkers studied it. And its idea was to create joined up health creation in the community of Peckham, which was a very poor area of London. Didn't have many doctors, didn't have many facilities for exercise and things like dietary advice and all that. People couldn't afford proper diet. So the Peckham experiment created a kind of wellness clinic where you had doctors, trained doctors to give help, medicines, but they were attached to nutritionists, to exercise specialists, to people that were interested in sanitation and generally helping advance the wellness of people in Peckham as a whole. And it was that Peckham experiment, it's written up, you can read about it online, that then the NHS was designed to emulate. That we would have a national health service. Now I argue this should be rebranded, renamed the National Healing Service. And I think once this catastrophe is over, and once we get rid of the catastrophe that is this Conservative government, I say so-called Conservative government because they're not Conservatives in the proper sense of the term. They're conserving nothing. With their Brexit flagship project, they're destructivists. It should be renamed the Destructivist Party. So once we get rid of the Destructivist Party and get Keir Starmer in office with probably a Green coalition of progressive MPs, cross Plaid Cymru, SNP, the Green Party and the Lib Dems, I think they should come together and form a national government of unity, get rid of these Tories, send them back to wherever they've come from, in Boris Johnson's case, somewhere across the Atlantic, and do some joined up thinking, get the Peckham experiment replicated, the proper National Healing Service that we need, which will be concerned for long-term fighting of illness, not just immediately let's all find a vaccine for COVID. No, let's work on health creation in the community as a whole. And that involves creating, even architects should be involved, like designing spaces that people want to hang out in and chat to each other as friends, because one of the things we're experiencing in lockdown is we miss other people. We miss being able to wander about the streets and have a coffee and chat to people. And that social bonding of community is so important for our health as individuals. Friendship is, 9/10 of enlightenment, as Buddha said. I'll be coming back to Buddha later. So anyway, that's what's going on in the world of COVID research. And my Green University, I'm interested in the social and political and philosophical challenges that arise out of COVID. Why didn't people see it coming? Well, I've been jumping up and down for the last years saying we need to fund peace research and healing research, not war. We shouldn't be funding people to make instruments that can blow up bodies and part bodies from souls. We should be funding research that is about, say, physiology. What is the body? Where is the soul? What is past life regression? What is, the soul's destiny? Where's the conscience in a human? Is there a part of us that thinks about right and wrong, good and evil, as Descartes says? Is it in the pineal gland? Where is it? Let's find it, because apparently some people are missing it. I'm a great lover of Descartes. He was born just down the road from me, where I'm speaking from, and although his ideas, are no longer needed, are no longer, cutting edge, his fundamental insight is that true knowledge starts with doubt, and that we need to apply philosophical method to scientific research, and that there is an ethical dimension to science, which Descartes said, and I 100% agree. So, okay, let's move on. What are we doing about the coronavirus theories? Well, I've been listening to the chat forums and Facebook and discussion groups and all the rest. I've picked up, I reckon now I've got about, I've got 8 theories as to what's caused the coronavirus, just to run through them again. And some have become branched out, so I've got a 6B and C, 6A, B, C. And just to run back through them, and I suspend judgment on all these. My job as a philosopher, like Descartes, is just to ask the questions, right? Or Socrates. That's my duty of joined up thinking. Some people criticise me for even asking the questions because they say, no, you're just peddling conspiracy theories. I mean, for God's sake, I'm just asking for truth. Now, when did asking for truth become a conspiracy? I suppose in some way asking for truth is always a bit of a conspiracy because there's so many vested interests don't want people to even ask for truth, let alone find it. And so just as Socrates was killed off, there are thousands of academics in prison as I speak around the world, as chair of the World Intellectual Forum in Europe. We're extremely concerned about this. So is Amnesty International. People for thinking are now being put in prison, and in the history of the last, in the history of the 20th century, many great intellectuals have been tortured, killed, persecuted, executed for just thinking, right? Well, I'm sorry. I'm with the thinkers. I'm with the intellectual freedom that academia is supposed to believe in. And that's why I'm doing this, right? So if you're not interested in intellectual freedom, you're not interested in intellectual thought, not interested in thinking, please just switch off. Don't waste my time, right? So the first thing is the 1A, is the COVID-19 coronavirus is simply an accidental mutation produced by bats and pangolins around Wuhan, and it somehow got into people. I reckon about 500 million people believe this at the moment around the world. That's an estimate. And perhaps more. The origin of this theory is the Chinese Communist Party, and that's the official line they've put out. I have a problem with the Chinese Communist Party historically, and I've got this book here on Mao by Jun Chang and John Halliday. It's a very brilliant study, Mao, the Unknown Story. The Chinese Communist Party, which was taken over by Mao, he killed the real Chinese communists and actual intellectuals. He persecuted them, and he reigned with a rule of terror in which deceit was made into an art form. Lying is not a strong enough word for what Mao was doing, how he terrorized the Chinese people into intellectual submission to communism. And I think the tragedy is that China, on the whole, is a very peaceful, laid-back, beautiful people, the Chinese people. They've been fostered by Taoism to turn the other cheek, to be quiescent, not, ask trouble. And by Buddhism, it brought in a double dose of that, which is you just get on with your, suffering, and if it's suffering, then, well, it must be your karma, so then, don't worry about it, you'll get a better life. And this all created a context in which an absolute madman and a terrorist who must have been born from some other planet where he'd been a dinosaur in former life, could come in and ravage like a carnivore these kind of people. And even his opponent, Chiang Kai-shek, as revealed in this, he lost because he was too kind. He wouldn't do the kind of cruelty that Mao was doing against his own people. And I was shocked reading this book. During the Long March, which is a great propaganda thing for the Chinese Communist Party, he was enabling thousands and thousands of his own army to die for strategic reasons. Again and again, he was sacrificing tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers. And during the civil war against the nationalists, unbelievable deceit and mendacity. So this is, I think, and I fear, and I'm putting this as a hypothesis, as a historian of the 20th century now, speaking with that hat on, is mendacity so ingrained in the Chinese Communist Party that we can literally believe nothing they say about the cause of this coronavirus outbreak? I suspend judgment on that. I ask my colleagues who are experts in Chinese contemporary Communist Party history and politics to answer that, because I think there is a case to be made that the veracity level is not what we would like. We know from documentary